much time as I can spend on it. I mean, it's not my field, energy and oil and stuff, but I feel that I've really got somewhere with it. And
you know loads about oil, didn't you? I thought you actually worked in that field as well. Long time
well,
ago.
I wouldn't say I know loads. I mean, I worked for Shell UK when it's where I did part of my training to be a chartered surveyor. So I know quite a lot about gas terminals because I valued one for the rating of it.
Right.
But that I mean that's another story. But obviously,
Roger,
I'm into energy.
It sounds like you're keen to get on with your business today. So if that means you're calling me now to go over the blog now, because that way you can get on with the rest of your work, I'm totally okay with that.
Sure. Well, I mean that was my thinking.
Okay.
Let's have a quick chat. I mean, I think we're on the same wavelength, Ranjan. I mean, the last two blogs of yours that I read, I mean, I get the feeling that you're tuned into the news cycle with a kind of a context viewpoint. And what I mean by that is that the news cycle of itself, if it just refers to itself, doesn't tell you anything. What you kind of have to do is roll it out and then hold it up and fix it and then put those pieces together.
Yeah.
And so, for instance, doing the blog yesterday, there was a swine flu vaccine that was tried to be introduced in 1976. Tried to do the same thing again in about 2007 or 8 or whatever, whenever it was, and then now we've got the COVID-19 vaccines, and swine flu is a coronavirus in the same way that COVID-19 or SARS-CoV-2 is a corona. So it's essentially the same thing. The next thing then is in 1990, it was the collapse of the Soviet Union when the wall came down. Now, what that led to was 10 years of liberalization of the Russian economy. So that's disaster capitalism and the shock doctrine. Now, at the beginning of that period, things like all the natural resources ended up in large oligarchies, and people like Roman Abramovich, for instance, owns Chelsea, and some of the big, like Russian oligarchs or whatever. Yeah. And then there's there was Yeltsin, and then Putin. And, whatever. Now, what happened to Russia then, in a really very parallel way, is what kind of is happening, or possibly could happen to the United States domestically now. All right, and the American oligarchy, like the Russian oligarchy, won't be affected by those machinations. Okay, but what the oligarchy does have is US petrodollar hegemony, and it's a transfer from that we're going through at the moment. Now, prior to petrodollar hegemony, there was the Bretton Woods dollar gold standard, and prior to that, there was the British pound sterling gold standard, and all of those standards, okay, were to one extent or another based on some sort of commodity. In 1973, with the oil shock, the basis of the value of issued currency went from gold effectively to oil. Okay, and the amount of oil that is allowed to flow into economies generally has a profound effect on the amount of money in circulation in the real economies of those companies. Obviously, the energy gets used in the real economy, i.e. oil, gas, electricity, etc. Now, that function used to be performed based on a gold standard. The oil standard, as a concept, okay, then became really important. And what we're in the middle of at the moment is a transfer from the oil-based currency standard to the carbon-based currency standard. And the basis of the carbon-based standard is to do with emissions of carbon dioxide. Okay. Now, emissions of carbon dioxide will also have a profound effect on the amount of real energy accessed in the real economy, and effectively the amount of money circulating in the real economy. But what is actually happening is that the carbon-based standard is becoming a fixed volume of currency, as you had as affected really medieval economies.
Hold on a second. I'm not going to contradict you, but I've suddenly realised as a result of listening to what you're saying, and I didn't want to interrupt you, but the carbon thing, that's central planning.
It is central.
Carry on.
Central banks is central planning.
Okay.
And the idea is that if you're a bank, you want the value of your money to be protected, and bankers like deflation because of that. And on a pure gold standard, it's very deflationary. Something called bimetallism, where you have gold and silver, isn't deflationary in the same way, because there's much more silver than there is gold. Now, in a gold in an oil-based petro standard, okay, basically the theory of peak oil was floated way back in the 1950s by Hubbard, but was really adopted in a cult-like way in the mid-2000s. And I'm seeing that as a precursor to a kind of it's almost an anarcho-primitivism that people like Michael Rupert were expounding. And there's another economist associated with that theory called Campbell. Well, I watched an Ian Crane talk from 2007, and he analyzes all of this. And I think that talk that Ian did in 2007 is absolutely brilliant. It's absolutely brilliant. And then there are also two interviews he does with
2017 or 2007.
2007. He went on tour in 2007, giving his public talks.
Brilliant.
And it's on the Ian Crane YouTube channel. It was posted in about 2012. Okay, but that was right in the thick of the action then. So that was in the run up to the global financial crisis, the Lehman's crash, as it were, right?
It was also coming straight. That is exactly when, in the same way that you had Live Aid in 1985, in 2007 you had Live Earth, which was the culmination of Al Gore's film. It went from winning an Oscar to then afterwards having concerts around the world where they were saying, you get your countries or your cities to sign on to pledge for Kyoto and all of this. CO2.
Now, all of that, I think, is part of the seeding into a new monetary regime. I've been going on about a carbon currency end game for a long time now. And that goes back to a talk. If you put carbon currency end game into my blog or on my BitChute channel, there's a talk comes up from a guy that had that as his title in a talk he gave about smart meters and all sorts of things. Again, in the early 2000s, I won't find it just now, right? But then characters like Chris Martenson and Peak Prosperity and the Crash Course crop up in this. Now, Martenson's been talking about COVID stuff quite a lot, but he appears in a channel called Peak Moment, and there's a link to him. I've got a section saying useful idiots, controlled opposition, gatekeepers, etc. Because I've based my blog on the hunting of the snark and Ship of Fools. So Ship of Fools is Plato. The hunting of the snark is kind of an allegory along the lines of Ship of Fools. It's people always say it's a nonsense poem, but it's not a nonsense poem. I think it's similar to the Wizard of Oz.
Is that Lear or C.S. Lewis? Or I mean,
Lewis Carroll.
Lewis Carroll. Sorry, right,
yeah. So the common theme in all of this, okay, from really the dawning of the oil age, okay, has been controlling the supply of energy, and through the supply of the energy, maintaining control of the money supply as well, in kind of tandem.
Okay.
And switching from hydrocarbons, and it's interesting that the World Economic Forum in their section on energy, they refer to oil, gas and all the rest of it as hydrocarbons, not fossil fuels, which is I find really quite interesting. But the point is that if we rely solely on so-called renewables, so that's wind, solar, green renewables, then I think we'd have to say so that's wind and solar. The amount of energy that can be produced from those sources cannot make up for the shortfall of oil and gas anytime soon, or indeed coal. Okay. And what is obviously happening is production of hydrocarbons in some economies, particularly in Africa, are not getting the level of investment they require because they want to run down the supply of hydrocarbons. And if you control the energy supply, you get deflation and you have less money in the economy. And effectively, if people are unable to make bricks without straw, they die. And frankly, that's what happened in Greece. So there's a very good interview that William Engdahl does about Greece with Ian Crane. They talk a lot about Greece and Varoufakis. Varoufakis, Steve Keen. I mean, Steve Keen, he was busted in his interview with Lynn Hessel. Now, Lynn Hessel is a professor. He's in he's either in Japan or Taiwan, all right. But he was one of the early correspondents with Satoshi Nakamoto on the P2P Foundation blog, which is where the initial paper, the white paper for Bitcoin, was launched. Okay, and it's very interesting that Steve Keen should be being interviewed, and no one's ever heard of the guy. I mean, I know a lot about Bitcoin, and the point is that the fact that the algorithm is patented by the NSA. Herschel speaking to Keen saying that basically he actually says in that interview he wants to that they're going to ration carbon credits. So effectively, what we're looking at is starvation rations in a slavery regime. Ultimately, I mean, that's very dramatic. But if you on my blog put in Serfs Up and then look at the 1969 paper about the causes of slavery and why slavery actually was bonded slavery and serfdom, whatever, why that stopped in general in the Middle Ages in different countries in Europe. I mean, one of the last countries to go away from that system was actually Sweden, strangely enough, which is obviously where I am at the moment. But the eugenicists and the population control people, in the blog today, there's a quote from G.K. Chesterton in the Usurers book. And he talks, basically, he says about the eugenicists, and the first paragraph of that, the Utopia of Usurers is the name of the book.
Yeah.
But the particular quote about the eugenicists is absolutely spot on, and it all fits in with this theme in the blog today of the hunting of the snark. You know, if I tell you 3 times, it will be true. The bank are talking about offering policies against fire and hail, so that's cold and warm. They're kind of allegories of centralized control of the monetary system, and how if you contract the amount of money in the economy, then people can't do commerce with each other, although they can, because they can make up their own arrangements. Now, Bitcoin is a really imperfect way of doing that, and almost has been keeping the bed warm for central bank digital currencies. And I do think that's what its role has really been, to keep the bed warm, because it was when the internet, towards the end of the 90s into the 2000s, became more established. This is when the P2P Foundation came up. End-to-end encryption is something which the powers that be absolutely hate, because we can have our privacy, but also very powerful interperson communications. So, you know, you sent me that thing with Tony Blair talking about
ID cards.
Yes. Well, there's another one. Apparently, the BBC have produced a film about end-to-end encryption, basically pointing it out as being a bad thing. The solar solarium thing, that's on my blog, which is a paper that came out in 2019 or 2020 again. Effectively, 24/7 full spectrum surveillance, and it's not surveillance capitalism. So that book, Surveillance Capitalism, it's actually surveillance feudalism. Okay, there's capitalism's got nothing to do with it. And so again with the Ship of Fools, the hunting of the snark is you know, people who shout the loudest, the people who get promotion, tend to set people's train of thought off in a particular direction, and they're either slight deflections from the truth. I mean, this is the point about Bruce Charlton's point about the you know, the 4 presentations of modern media, you know, presenting good as bad, bad as good, bad as bad for a bad reason, and good as good for a bad reason. I mean, those 4, and it, you know, I think he's absolutely right about that. But the climate change, central bank money narratives, but then the dark side of all of that is the population narrative and population control, and they're based upon pseudoscience. And of course, the reason you don't hear anything about Chester Belloc, that's G.K. Chesterton and Hilaire Belloc, is because they nailed these things back in the 1930s. And Lord Acton said that, the final battle coming down the ages, which sooner or later has to come to a head, is the people against the banks. More correctly, it would be the people against the central banks, and we're really there now. And so, when Coleridge said in the table talk, that the national debt has made, more people rich than it has any business to make. Coleridge was friendly with, a whole host of interesting people, including people that had been involved in the treason trials of the 1790s. Obviously, the American Civil War, the 1776, that was over the refusal of George III to allow colonial scrip to be issued. Greenbacks, the Bradbury pound, all of these things, effectively, the myth of scarcity, and there's no greater myth of scarcity than the myth of peak oil. And so it's a story of trying to put the genie back in the bottle, trying to unwind the Prometheus's gift of fire to the people, and so the Prometheus metaphors are definitely allowed here. I wrote a song.
All I know about
called We Are
Prometheus,
Spartacus.
the only thing I remember about Prometheus is he must have done something naughty, because he ended up being chained to some sort of a cliff and the vultures were pegging
That's
away
right.
forever.
Yeah. Well, Ted Hughes wrote a poem called Prometheus's Rock. Okay. Shelley wrote a book about Prometheus. And of course, then the famous, I think it was, I can't say it, but the Greek dramatist Aeschylus.
I call it Aeschylus because he did.
Yeah.
I think he did the Oresteia with a lot of Oedipus in it.
Yeah. So this just it's all about about the divine right of kings, about the divine, predestination of elites justified by false religions and ecclesiasticals. That's Robert Graves' point when he's interviewed by Muggeridge. So, poets are real bastards when it comes to going into the detail of stuff. Shelley, Coleridge, Pound, Ted Hughes, C.S. Lewis, Hunting of the Snark. Yeah, Kipling. There's lots of stuff in Kipling that when you read it, there's a brilliant essay by Paul Foote, which is all about Shelley, and it's talking about Queen Mab, and Queen Mab is like it's not a poem, but it's everyone should read it. It's it's very modern, but in his introduction he says that at Oxford there was a professor of poetry that said there's no poem that benefits from editing greater than The Mask of Anarchy, which is Shelley's poem about the Peterloo massacre. But these are all foundational stories of universal liberty, as it were, like universal suffrage and stuff like that, actually fighting for rights and all the rest of it. And so the final thing is that bit of a speech that I cut out, which was based on the trial of Hardy, a guy called Thomas Hardy, not the novelist, but Thomas Hardy, who set up a thing called the London Correspondence Society in the 1790s, and then was tried for sedition. So that was Whigs, Tories, William Pitt the Younger, all of that stuff, which actually, strangely enough, is leading up to the union with Scotland, and all of the skullduggery and what have you that went on around that. But as I say, as we are at a pivotal moment. The last 2 years have been unprecedented. They've been masking a crash which is much bigger than the crash of 2008. Okay, and the degree of austerity that the carbon-based monetary system that they wish to bring in, it's a degree of austerity that will make it will make everything else pale into insignificance, and it will cause a lot of people to despair, but a lot of people will starve. And this is the whole point about limiting the production of energy, is a way of maintaining geopolitical relevance and hegemony. And so but the oligarchy is global. Okay, forget about countries. You know, if it comes to, well, we're all cannon fodder. Okay, civilians are fair game. You know, our young people are sent off to go and fight these wars. But the oligarchy, effectively, they are hybridized. They absolutely are. And so when David did his blog about the disloyal, and when he talks about the disloyal, he's talking about people that are global citizens. So they're global citizens in a very Roman Empire way. Okay.
Was that the one? Was that the one that was called Culture Matters?
No, he did another one called The Disloyal about the same time as he wrote that one, Culture Matters. So
can I just quickly mention something? Because in relation to some of that, because I remember getting a call from him asking me to have a quick look at what he'd done before he put it out. And I think he was worried at the time about backlash that comes of speaking about certain things in certain ways. And I think what he was saying to me at the time was, you know, he didn't go into it much, but it was that if you have people living in a certain place, wherever that place is, then their rituals and whatever it is that they've been doing over the course of time, they ought to be respected. And so that's why I was interested in what you were saying about the loyal, because one of the other things that people have also said to me is that on the one hand, if you've got environmentalism, but you've also got the UN attitude towards transnationalism, and the British Empire and everything else like that, the uprooting of people or the putting of new people into a place where you never had new people before, then that means that the people who were originally there, their voice gets crowded out. And if you can get them to move, uproot them, that whole thing, it's about breaking the link between the people and the land.
Yeah.
And if you can do that, then you can do anything.
Yes. I mean, that's what it is. It's trying to divorce people's meaning from place and community and transfer that alliance to an all-seeing, all-beneficent, yet very, very scary centralized state. And if there's anything,
when you said the disloyal, that's what made me think of that.
Yeah, the disloyal, David, is purely referring to the oligarchy.
Yeah,
international global citizens.
People who want that. People who want that to be the case.
Yes, and yeah, and so its political party is the Trilateral Committee, and you know, Chatham House, and they do have a very, very mechanistic, materialistic, algorithmic, control freak worldview, but they are the ship of fools. They are the ship of fools. Like when Fauci says, "I am science," you can't argue with me. I am science. Okay.
Yeah. Well, on that topic, you'll remember that in my blog, I said candidate for ubiquitous technocrat. Quite high up, you're going to get Mario Draghi. I mean, obviously, before him, another ex-Goldman guy was Peter Sutherland, who died a couple of years ago. He flipped from BP to World Bank to WTO to Goldman and everything like that, Vatican. But I remember one of his UN jobs was head of migration. And I thought that was fascinating. Just the idea of him being in all of these different places. And
he was involved in the EU with that stuff as well, because he was an EU commissioner as well, I think.
Yeah.
So, but it's at the heart of it. Okay, is the controlling of resources. So that's minerals, access to land, access to physical capital and resources, access to energy. Okay, well, energy is a resource, but energy mixed with resources, mixed with human input. Okay, right. That's what creates wealth, as it were, right? And all that money is an intermediary to. It's almost an algorithm for how to mix those things up, but it's kind of a self-determining algorithm, because if you have a free market, right? Free trade and free markets are polar opposites. That's another thing that people really need to understand. And free trade, okay, which is unfree trade, it's effectively licensed pillaging of territories or franchises. Okay,
so when you say
franchises
free trade,
replace nations. Free trade is in the classical liberal.
So what you're saying is that free trade, quote unquote, is basically a set of agreements that most people can't have anything to do with.
It's imperialism. Yeah, that's what it is. And the trilateral committee, that's what trilateralism is. It's like saying instead of having bilateral agreements, it's trilateral in the sense.
Right. I never knew what that meant, actually.
Yeah, well,
it means
I
middleman.
started looking at it the other day. Well, what it actually.
Fucking
it's
confusing.
like it's like the Treaty of Westphalia. There's a very funny sketch of that, where they're all divvying up the world in the same way that happened with the Allies after World War II, redrawing the borders after World War One, the 30 Years' War, the 100 Years' War. All of these things, okay, have all tended towards ever greater centralization.
What should we call it? The Hanseatic League. I remember.
Well, but the Hanseatic League is different. The Hanseatic League.
Well, it allows independent trading as opposed to.
The Hanseatic League was a mixture. It is kind of was it like a free market?
Right.
That was the idea.
I remember.
They got together.
You remember when Brexit happened, and we were talking about the EU and why we wanted to pull out. I remember Helena told me that she thought when she said yes to going in, she thought it would be like the Hanseatic League, but it hasn't ended up like that.
No, the Hanseatic League is a real. There was a very good article on that in the Mises website several years back. If you've put in Hanseatic League into my blog search, it will come up. I've contrasted the Hanseatic League to some of these. Basically, I looked at it really closely when I did actually design a local cryptocurrency. I did that work a long time ago, but one of the things I looked at the time was the Hanseatic League. So, free markets open markets are quite different to free trade, and so the LaRouche organization talk about the American system, which does have tariffs, does have regulations, and does protect its own merchants and manufacturers and artisans and stuff like that. What globalism does is it basically awards a monopoly to someone, and then no one else can compete with it. And an example of that that's given, which I was just looking for the source for earlier, was when effectively when the Saudi oil franchise, as it were, was actually put into the hands of the current Saudi royal family. Okay, the agreement was that the independent producers in Texas would be allowed to go to the wall. Okay, and the idea being that it's obviously for the oligarchy, it's much more important to control the the money.
So that was a domestic US agenda, actually. What you just said.
Effectively, globalists work against the interests of its own home producers and markets.
Fascinating. Was that in the 30s then? Was that 2030s? Is that what you meant?
I tried to find the reference earlier because and I haven't found it yet.
Okay.
I think it's in the Chadwick thing, so I will find it and I'll sort of stick it somewhere. Thanks. But anyway, I mean that's kind of where I'm up to. But I mean I think that there are clearly problems with Mark Carney's faction of the oligarchy. I think they screwed up. Some people are like Ian Davis on UK Column. Makes a persuasive argument that it wasn't really a cock up. It's achieved what it wants to achieve. I'm not sure how true that is. You know, I'm not saying he's not telling the truth. I'm just saying I'm not sure how strong an argument.
What's he talking about?
Well, a lot of environmentalists are pissed off, and Carney obviously didn't come away. You know, there wasn't all the backslapping and all the rest of it that went on at Copenhagen and stuff like that, right? But yeah, I mean that bit I haven't. That's the next question that I do want to.
I think it was a massive success for them because, okay, on the one hand, you've got this idea: can we sign something? So something was signed. Who gives a fuck? The point is the fact that they got so much marketing, so many people saying they were on board and everything like that. It was about the pre and the, you know, and just the fact that so many people acted like they give a shit. That was part of the getting, as you said, warming the bed. Well, warming the bed for the currency.
Well, it's in the same way I think that the COVID narrative is bust. So's that one, and I think they've now I think they've scored a huge own goal because the religious foundation of people accepting starvation because it's for the good of the planet, okay, isn't going to wash. And after 2008, the austerity, it was like, oh, well, you know, we've had this terrible thing and we're all in it together, right? What's really, 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 and I think they kind of figured this one out, that this is the oligarchy, the financial oligarchy particularly, they realized that another bailout wasn't likely to happen. And what a bailout actually is looting of the real economy to put its stuff so it can be loaned out again or used as collateral again by the banking system, right? So and the narrative that was supposed to come out of all of that was sovereign debt, and the sovereigns are now bankrupt and do to everywhere else what they did to Greece, right? Again, all the furlough payments, all the rest of it, if Rishi Sunak, say, takes over from Boris and then stands up and says, right, okay, we're going to be, but we've got to have austerity now, and does what George Osborne does when the coalition came in 2010, will that wash? Are there sufficient people clued up enough now, and do they have sufficient lines of communication to actually say, hold on a minute, this is actually wrong? So of course the propaganda mix is about trying to put a lid on the internet, and this is where the P2P stuff comes in, the end-to-end encryption,
Right.
And as long as people have got mobile phones, and I mean, internet connections, I prefer an internet connection and a PC myself, but I mean, I can hack mobile phones. Anyone can hack a mobile phone if they're determined enough to do what needs to be done. Okay, so I mean, it used to be called, like, I mean, I won't go into all of that, but it can be done. And frankly, if it all kicks off, then the recipes will be sent to everybody to be able to figure that shit out. But it's a learning curve, but it's all this stuff is possible. So the internet, in many respects, has been a huge shot. It's basically been an own goal by the oligarchy. I think they felt it would be great for surveillance, and so but they didn't realise, because frankly, what it is, they underestimate the intelligence of the general public. I mean, it's equally important not to overestimate the intelligence of the general public, right? But underestimating it is probably the greater error. So.
Yeah. Well, I suppose my favourite Mencken quote is, "No one ever went broke underestimating the taste of the American people." So that's taste, not intelligence.
Yeah.
So, I might buy crap, but it doesn't mean that I believe it.
Yeah. So anyway, look, I better shoot.
Well, great talking to you. Thanks a lot.
That's kind of where I'm up to, but yeah, I've had it's actually been getting on for 2 months now of all of that stuff. But like I say,
yeah. Sorry,
those Ian Crane things, the last 5 things I've put up on my BitChute channel are all they're all other people's stuff. They're definitely worth watching. I mean, yeah, it definitely is. Definitely
I mean, I'm very interested in what you said about Ian Crane from 2007. This guy from the 1790s who ran the London whatever it was.
Thomas Hardy, the London Correspondence Club, or whatever it's called. So that's basically the treason trials of the 1790s, 1794, I think it was. They come up, and it's a microcosm of today and pamphleteering and that sort of.
Yeah, because obviously, what's his name? Assange gets his verdict at 10:45 today. Whether it goes to Supreme or whether he just has to leave.
Oh, good Lord! I hope they do stay it. I mean, it's WikiLeaks is a very interesting thing. But there's no doubt that Julian Assange has been badly served. I mean, he's been double crossed by someone on the and it's disgraceful. Our government has and the Australian government have absolutely no business in treating anyone like they've treated Julian Assange.
Sure. The other thing that I wanted to mention was, when you were talking about, so you talked about Russia, the creation of the oligarchs pretty much by the US, the creation of those Russian oligarchs, and because they allowed the transfer and everything like that of all of the assets. So when I was studying economics in the late 90s, as that was happening, so when I started, all that was happening, And then at the end, I did a project on the long-term capital management hedge fund that blew up. And because they always talk about how you had the Nobel Prize winning economists who were working for them and things like that. And so it was both too big to fail, and also, you know, they were the smartest guys in the room. But that makes me, so when you were talking about when we come to now and how you've got the COVID thing, then the possible carbon rationing through COP26, I think about a bunch of people who are too clever for their own good. And suddenly these things, they're all their bets are facing the same direction and it doesn't work. You know, it's, you know, if something moves, then suddenly it collapses. And as you said, so now there's a bunch of narratives that have collapsed. Not least when you look at what happened in Belgium this weekend, where the cops are running away from the protesters because of the COVID thing. You know, the vaccine passports.
Well,
anyway, I'll let you carry on.
Yeah, like I say, I mean, I think the only useful thing to do with the news cycle is to pin it together, because it comes ripped up with no context. Right. So, yeah.
Brilliant. Okay. Well, have a great day.
And you, Aaron.
Thanks a lot.
Cheers.
Bye.
Take care. Bye.